It's been said that every day God gives us 10 emotional coins to spend or burn up in any way that we would want to. And we can focus those coins on spending them on the negative things of life that burn us up or the positive things that build us up. And the question becomes, how many coins do we have at the end of the day? Have there been more withdrawals than deposits? Where do we need to invest our emotional coins today? When it comes to investing those emotional coins, psychologists tell us that the number one limiter of personal satisfaction and fulfillment and growth in life is fear. Fear of failure, fear of rejection, fear of betrayal, fear of the future, fear of the unknown. They tell us that when we're born with only two emotions. The first emotion is the emotion of contentment. We feel a pleasant feeling. There's this internal sense that everything is right with the whole world, that things are going to be okay. And that is marked by a smile on the face of a little infant. But there's a second emotion, and that is discontentment. It is an unpleasant feeling. It is when we get hungry and we're not fed, or our stomach aches and it's upset. And that is marked by red faces and a lot of crying, which leads to anxiety. Interestingly, after birth, there is a third emotion that quickly develops. That third emotion is the emotion of fear. It is a learned emotion. As our memory develops, we remember the times when we got let down, when we were hurt, when our needs went unmet. And those memories produce anxiety and worry and stress, and we become afraid. We learn at a very early age that there are healthy fears. You touch a burning stove and you get burned. And there are unhealthy fears. And those unhealthy fears are limiters. They hold us back. They bind us up. They hold us captive. Which is why the Bible says over and over and over again, fear not. Do not be afraid. Let's look at a story in Matthew chapter 14, which begins at verse 22. It's the story of Jesus and Peter and a storm on a big, big lake. Matthew records for us, immediately he made the disciples get into a boat and go before him to the other side, while he dismissed the crowds. And after he had dismissed the crowds, he went up on the mountain by himself to pray. When evening came, he was there alone. Immediately after what? Well, Jesus had just fed 5,000 people. The crowd was whipped up into a frenzy. Everybody wanted to see Jesus and what he would do next. And it's at this point that Jesus sends the disciples ahead on a boat to the other side of the lake. And he says, I'll see you there. And he sends the crowd home and he stays behind. Why does he stay behind? Because he wants to pray. He wants to spend time alone with his Father. Matthew continues the story in chapter 14 with verse 24, where he writes, But the boat by this time was a long way from the land, beaten by the waves, for the wind was against them. They launch out. It's a beautiful, crystal clear evening. Villages dot the shoreline. There's a cool, fresh breeze. Peter is the seasoned veteran. He has been watching the skies. In those days, fishermen didn't have GPS or radar or any way they could anticipate what was coming next, so they became great observers of the weather. He doesn't like the look of things. He knows that Lake Galilee is a large body of water situated in a valley between two ridges, shaped like a giant wind tunnel. And those ridges compress the air and quickly turn calm waters into a raging storm with enormous power. All of a sudden, the storm sweeps over them. The wind kicks up, the waves are crashing, the wood is straining, the canvas is tearing. The boat is in danger of sinking. They feel like they're going under. They're out there all alone, and they're afraid. People have died on this lake. It's dark, it's damp, it's cold, and there's no rescue for us. I don't imagine that I have to spend much time convincing all of us how destructive and immobilizing and tyrannizing the power of fear can be in our lives, especially when it sweeps into our lives unexpectedly like this storm. We get blindsided. We never saw it coming. And maybe some of you find yourself in those kinds of situations this very moment as you're listening to this message. The storm just comes up unexpectedly. And because of the magnitude of the storm and because of the unknown of that storm, we never know when it's going to quit or how big it's going to get. Is it going to get worse? We become afraid. Many of us know firsthand what it is to do battle every day with those kinds of storms in our lives. And if I asked you, what is your great storm right now in your life? What would you say? Put yourself in that boat. Imagine that night out there all alone. What sudden storm swept into your life? What would you say? Matthew continues in verse 25. And in the fourth watch of the night, he came to them walking on the sea. But when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were terrified and said, "It's a ghost." And they cried out in fear. But immediately Jesus spoke to them, saying, "Take heart, it is I. Do not be afraid." It's the fourth watch, sometime after 3 o'clock in the morning. It's in the dead of night. They're exhausted. They've been fighting this storm all night long. And then Jesus comes to them in the dark with the wind at full force. And when they see him, they say, "Look, out there, there's someone, there's something coming towards us, walking in the water towards us." It can't be a human being because human beings can't walk on water. It must be a ghost or a sea monster or something that's coming to harm us. They don't know what it is, that fear of the unknown. They don't know what's going to happen to them. So they cry out. They are terrified. They are even more troubled in the midst of their storm. And that is why Jesus immediately speaks to them. And he says, "Take heart. It's me. It's me. Do not be afraid." Present imperative command. Stop fearing. You weren't created to fear. It is a learned response. You have learned how to be afraid, and I want to teach you to learn how not to be afraid. I love 2 Timothy chapter 1, verse 7. "For God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of love and power and a sound mind." God did not create us to have a spirit of fear, of negative, unhealthy fear. He created us to have a spirit of love and of power and of a sound mind, of a crystal clear mind resting on the truths of God. So Jesus says, "I'm here, and because I'm here, fear not. Do not be afraid." Well, check out what happens next. In verse 28, we read, "And Peter answered him, 'Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water.' He said, 'Come.' So Peter got out of the boat and walked on the water and came to Jesus." Peter says, "Okay, if it is you, Jesus, and you're the God of all power, command me to come to you and I will walk on the water." And Jesus says to him, "Come." Now, notice what happens. Peter went over the side of the boat. He puts his foot in the water. He puts his toe in the water. It's cold. It's scary. But he gets out of the boat. The question is he still trusting in Jesus? And I'm imagining that he isn't at this point because he's still holding on to the boat real tight. This is the moment of decision. He's gotten halfway there. Now it's the moment of decision to let go of the boat and stand on the water, in the waves, in the dark, in the storm. And so he lets go. And there must be a freedom there. There must be an empowerment there that he lets go and he's standing. on the water, in the storm, in the waves, looking into the eyes of Jesus. Faith is an action. You can't see faith. If you said Stu's a man of faith, what would you do if you opened me up, if you looked, did me a medical examination? Where would you find the faith? You can't find it. You can only see it by what a person does. Faith is an action. It's not a feeling. And in this case, Peter lets go of the boat. At some point, we all have to get out of the boat. But that's only half faith. That's hedging our bets. The next step that we must take in true faith, in real faith, is to let go of the boat. To let go of that which we have been holding onto in place of Jesus. To let go of our security, of our comfort, of everything that we know. It causes us to ask the question, what are we holding onto in the storm, in the unknown, rather than trusting in Jesus? Well, we know what happens next in verse 30. But when Peter saw the wind, he was afraid, and beginning to sink, cried out, "Lord, save me." All of a sudden, Peter takes his eyes off of Jesus and he looks around and he sees the reality of the storm and he starts to have second thoughts. What am I doing? Can Jesus really be trusted? Am I really standing on the water? And when he has those questions and when he begins to doubt, he starts to sink. The storm is strong. The waves are great. The lake is big. So when he turns his eyes from Jesus, he loses his trust and his faith. Peter gets a big case of the what ifs. What if this storm is too big for Jesus? What if I begin to sink in the water? Fear thrives on the what ifs. For instance, relationally, what if I really share with you who I really am and what I'm really like and what I'm really concerned about? And what if you don't like me? What if I get hurt? What if there's rejection? What if there's betrayal? What if I don't measure up to your expectations? And those what ifs, they spin out lies and they start to magnify, and we start to spend negative emotional coins. We start to spend those negative emotional coins on things that might never happen. And when we do that, it robs us of power and we start to sink. When faith runs into reality, into storms, faith can turn to fear. Like the infant, we remember all of the bad things that could happen. We start investing our coins in negative energy, and that causes us to lose our identity in God, the way that He designed us to live with a spirit of love and power and a sound mind. It's at this moment when Peter realized the reality of the storm, the presence of Jesus, and that he's sinking, that he prayed this beautiful little prayer, 3 words, Lord, save me. Sometimes we don't have the time to pray the Lord's Prayer or to recite the Apostles' Creed. We just have to say, Lord, save me. I think the nature of faith is a process, not a point. We see the storm, the waves, the wind, and we move back and forth between faith and fear, faith and fear. We have faith and then we get afraid. We have faith and we get afraid. We move back and forth until the moment when we realize that we are not in control any longer, that we are totally dependent upon God, that we cannot save ourselves. When we say, Jesus, I recognize now I got out of the boat that's half faith. I've got to let go and trust in you. Only you can save me. It is complete surrender to your will. That's when faith gets rediscovered in our lives. Remember, as fear is a learned emotion, faith is a learned response. Well, the story concludes in verse 31. Jesus immediately reached out his hand and took hold of him, saying to him, "O you of little faith, why did you doubt?" And when they got into the boat, the wind ceased. Now, if I were Jesus and Peter had already stood on the water, and I'd been trying to teach him the nature and character of faith, and then he began to sink and lose his faith in me, my response might have been, well, you didn't trust me, Peter. I'm going to let you sink. I'm going to make an example out of you for all times. On your own, you had doubt and began to sink. Why did you doubt me? But he doesn't. What he says to him is, Peter, even when you doubted, when you failed, when you turned away, I reached out my hand to you. God always meets us at the point of our greatest need. And certainly Peter over and over and over again let Jesus down and failed him. And Jesus always came and extended his hand to him. It's then when he prayed that Lord save me prayer that Jesus responded as he was sinking by reaching out his hand. Sometimes we need a hand to reach down to us when we cannot help ourselves. And so here we find the incarnate, all-powerful, creator God reaching out and taking hold of a finite, fearful follower. And Jesus takes his hand and he leads him to the boat, walking on the water, and he lets Peter climb back into that boat, and then Jesus gets back into the boat, and then, soaking wet, in the midst of the storm, all of a sudden, the waves ceased, the wind stopped, and the storm was over. I can remember that for years I had a fear of flying on commercial airlines. I mean, I just absolutely dreaded it. If I knew I had to take a flight weeks in advance, I would begin to become afraid. The anxiety would grow and the stress factors would just fill my life. I dreaded walking down that rampway and getting into that airplane and the door closing and sealing us in. Part of it was a fear of claustrophobia, that I was sealed into this place and I couldn't get out and my life was out of control. I spent so many years, a decade of my life, with a fear of flying. And it was only when, and I'm not saying this was easy at all, but it was only when I said, Lord, save me, when I released all of that, when I said, okay, whatever happens, happens. Let it happen. When I let go of the boat, that my fears began to diminish to the point where today I love airports, I love airplanes, I love flying. I don't have to waste one single ounce of emotional energy on fear any longer. I don't have to invest my coins in those days preceding that flight on those negative feelings of fear in my life. Peter realized that it was Jesus, not the storm, that was the ultimate reality. He realized that Jesus said, I accept you with all of your fears and all of your failures. I accept you as I am. And that acceptance defined all that Peter was in his life, who he loved and who he trusted and who he served. His Lord was greater than all of his fears. In fact, he allowed God then to use his fears to draw him to Jesus. See, once we have the Savior question settled, Lord, save me, it's complete surrender. Once we have that question settled, we face life differently. We live a life that is beyond and above fear. We realize that we don't have to waste 1 ounce of emotional energy on the negative side of fear ever again in our lives. We can stop spending the negative, fear-filled coins. We are able to say, I can handle this. I can handle whatever life throws my way, not because I am strong, but because of the power of the living God within me. It's being able to say that the power of the living God within me is greater than the power of the storm around me. Okay, nice story about some nice people that went out and got caught in a big storm one day and the power of Jesus in our lives. The question becomes, so what? What difference does that make? What practical difference does that make in my life today and forever? Well, I've got 3 questions for you. The first one is this. Let's identify the storms in our life. What are they right now? What's got us on the run? What makes us afraid? What brings up bad memories? What brings up learned responses to past conditions that relate to the present time that we live in? What is our storm? Second, where are we hedging our bets with Jesus? Where we're out of the boat, but we haven't let go. We're not fully trusting. We're hedging our bets. It's half faith. So much of life is not only getting out of the boat, but it's letting go and living fully in our trust and reliance on Jesus. So what is it that we hold on to from our past because of our fear to let go? What is it? And finally, where do we take our eyes off Jesus once we let go? We've moved towards faith, we've trusted him, but then we have second thoughts, the what ifs creep in, and we wonder, can he really hold me up? We see the magnitude of the storm and the negative coins start being spent. We move towards the what ifs. So where do we need to get to the place where we can finally say, it's complete surrender. Lord, save me. Where do we pray that prayer? Where are we investing our coins in the negative things of life, the negative fears of life, rather than the positive faith and faithfulness of Jesus for you and me? Lord, save me. That may be the greatest prayer that we could ever pray. Pray it with me now, today. Lord, save me.